Blood spurted from Arthur Henry's throat as he tore the cryotube's air mask off, gasping like a fish ripped from water. Metal screeched against metal as his combat boots kicked the frosted pod door open. He flopped onto the darkened cryo bay floor, heaving, heart pounding, skin burning from the extended chill. Arthur's head spun, synapses firing randomly, struggling to remember how he got here, wherever this was. Random images strobed in his mind, Norcadian ships raining emerald beams of death, skyscrapers exploding into dust, millions of humans crammed into planet-sized colonization arcs, fleeing to the stars. Arthur was an ex-Marine. He had stayed behind on Earth as part of a volunteer suicide squad, fighting to the last man to buy time. The thundering footsteps of 8-foot-tall Norcadian berserkers had echoed behind him as he dived into a cryopod, hoping its shielding could save his life. Now awake, Arthur staggered to a blinking computer terminal. His eyes widened at the display. 500,000 years. He'd been asleep for over 500,000 years. A monotone female voice crackled from a speaker. "I am Sarah, the ship's AI. Sensors indicate the Norcadians have abandoned Earth. We have returned home. However, I have lost contact with the colonization arcs. You may be the last human alive." Arthur's gut wrenched. He dashed back to the cryobay and wiped frost from the glass of the other pods. Body after body, now just desiccated skeletons grinning through the portholes, the machinery failed after eons in space. A primal howl of grief and rage burst from Arthur's chest. He sank to his knees, alone, the last man in the universe. Mankind's final defender, awake 500,000 years in the future. Arthur shook his head clear and staggered toward the airlock. He had to see what was left of home, see if any humans still survived, and if any trace of the Norcadian warp gate remained that brought them here, the key to tracking humanity's destroyers between the stars. The future of the human race lay in the balance, on Arthur's burdened shoulders. Grabbing weapons from a dusty locker, he stepped out to explore the dead Earth. His quest was clear: find any human survivors, neutralize any Norcadian holdouts, and use their technology to chase them across the galaxy to rescue the colonization arcs. Humanity would have its vengeance or go extinct, starting today. Arthur tugged on a bulky EVA suit, the rubbery material long decayed but still functional. The helmet's HUD flickered to life, casting an eerie green glow across his face. With a deep breath, he stepped into the airlock, the hatch hissing shut behind him. The ramp lowered with a groan, revealing a landscape bathed in sickly bioluminescence. Tendrils of mist curled around towering mushrooms and pulsing lichen, the air thick with spores. In the distance, the skeletal remains of skyscrapers clawed at the sky. Arthur ventured forward cautiously, his boots squelching in the spongy ground. Each step brought him closer to the ruins, their vine-choked facades looming ever larger. Shadows danced in the corners of his vision, but he pressed on. A skittering noise froze him in his tracks. Arthur whirled, pulse pounding, as a creature emerged from the rubble. It was the size of a large dog, with a segmented carapace and far too many legs. Acid dripped from snapping mandibles, hissing where it hit the ground. The creature lunged. Arthur dove to the side, snatching up a rusted metal bar. He swung with all his strength, connecting with the thing's head. It reeled back, dazed. A guttural bellow echoed from deeper in the ruins, answered by a chorus of chittering. Arthur's blood ran cold as dozens of the creatures poured from the buildings, a writhing tide of chitin and claws. He ran, his suit's servos whining with the strain. The horde pursued, skittering over rubble and ruin. Arthur sprinted up the ship's ramp, slamming the airlock controls. The hatch sealed with a hiss, muffling the scratching and shrieking outside. "Sarah, lock everything down," Arthur gasped, tearing off his helmet. "Affirmative," the AI responded. "Warning, exterior hull breach detected." "What, where?" "The creatures appear to be secreting some form of corrosive substance. Hull integrity at 87% and falling." Ice settled in Arthur's gut. He staggered to the ship's database, fingers flying over the controls. Come on, there's got to be something." His heart nearly stopped. There, in flickering holographics, was an image of the creatures, Norklings, larval stage Norcadians. "If these are the babies," Arthur whispered, "where are the adults?" The database entry was terrifyingly sparse, but one line in particular leapt out. Adults possess rudimentary intelligence and are far more dangerous. Arthur glanced at the hull integrity readout. 79%. He had to move, and fast. "Sarah, give me the location of the nearest human bunker." A map flickered to life, a pulsing dot indicating a facility a few clicks distant. Arthur shouldered the ship's last plasma rifle and as much survival gear as he could carry. The readout blinked. 74%. The creature's assault was relentless. Arthur watched the airlock camera feed, waiting for a gap in the swarm. There, a brief thinning. He stabbed the airlock control and charged down the ramp, boots pounding on metal. The Norklings shrieked, surging forward, but he was already sprinting, running for all he was worth into the nightmare ruins of Earth, into the unknown. Arthur's heart pounded as he darted from shadow to shadow, the chittering of Norkling patrols never far behind. Each narrow escape left him more exhausted, more desperate. Just as his hope began to flicker, he spotted it. The bunker coordinates glowing faintly on his HUD. He approached cautiously, plasma rifle at the ready. The bunker was in worse shape than he'd feared, its reinforced walls cracked and crumbling, exposing the interior to the poisoned air. Movement from inside set him on edge, and he tightened his grip on the rifle. A silhouette resolved in the gloom, tall and spindly, definitely not human. Arthur's finger hovered over the trigger. Then a voice called out, the English halting and broken. "Human, you are human." The figure emerged, hands raised. It was a grey-skinned alien, its body long and thin, large black eyes blinking slowly in the dim light. "I am Spiker," it said, "last of the Vin, slaves to the Norcadians." Arthur kept his rifle trained on the alien, but listened as it spun its tail. How the Norcadians had uplifted the Vin to work their mines, how they'd stripped Spiker's world bare and moved on, how Spiker had stowed away on a Norcadian ship, seeking refuge, and ended up stranded on Earth. "I hate Norcadians as you do," Spiker said. "Let me help, let me fight." Against his better judgment, Arthur lowered his rifle. He was alone on a hostile world. He needed all the help he could get. Over the next weeks they fortified the bunker, Spiker proving invaluable with his knowledge of Norcadian tech. They managed to repair a transmitter, salvage some rations and plasma cells. Arthur began to think they might just have a chance. Until the night he woke to find Spiker hunched over the transmitter, whispering urgently. The next day, disaster. A Norcadian warfare pod ambushed them, warriors actively hunting, not just patrolling. In the chaos of plasma fire and screeching Norklings, Arthur saw Spiker, pinned down, gesturing and shouting to the Norcadians in their clicking tongue. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. Spiker had led them here, sacrificed Arthur to save his own skin. Cut off and outnumbered, Arthur had no choice. He ran, plasma scorching the ground at his heels, the taste of ash and defeat bitter on his tongue. He fled into the ruins, leaving behind his only ally, and perhaps humanity's last hope. Arthur ran until his lungs burned, the skittering sounds of Norkling scouts never far behind. He ducked into a crumbling transit tunnel, the darkness enveloping him like a shroud. Collapsing against the cold metal wall, he let the rifle slip from his fingers, clattering to the ground. Despair crept over him, insidious tendrils wrapping around his heart. Spiker's betrayal stung like acid, eating away at his resolve. Humanity's last hope, extinguished by the selfish act of an alien he'd foolishly trusted. What was the point of fighting on in this dead world, alone, hunted? Tears streaked through the grime on Arthur's face. His body shook with silent sobs, all the pain and grief he'd pushed down for so long finally breaking free. He was ready to let go, to let the Norcadians win. Suddenly a burst of static from his radio sliced through the darkness. A voice, garbled but unmistakable, repeated a desperate plea. Mayday, Mayday. This is Captain Ava Novak of Colony Ship Hyperion. We are under attack by unknown hostiles. Repeat, under attack. Requesting immediate assistance from any available Earth forces. Transmitting coordinates now. Arthur's heart leapt into his throat. A colony ship, survivors! And Ava had said we. There were others, he wasn't alone. Humanity still had a chance. Newfound determination surged through Arthur's veins. He snatched up his rifle and staggered to his feet, ignoring the stabbing pain in his injured leg. He had to get back to the ship, had to find a way to reach the Hyperion. He'd make the Norcadians pay for every inch of ground. Emerging from the tunnel, Arthur was immediately beset by Norkling scouts. Plasma streaked past him as he dove for cover, the creature's shrieks filling the air. He returned fire, each blast finding its mark, but there were so many. A searing pain tore through Arthur's thigh. He stumbled, barely catching himself before he fell. Hot blood soaked his pant leg, leaving a crimson trail as he limped on, gritting his teeth against the agony. The ship loomed ahead, a battered beacon of hope. Arthur lunged up the ramp, plasma scorching the metal at his heels. He slammed the hatch controls, collapsing as it sealed behind him with a hiss. "Sarah," he gasped, dragging himself to the control room. "I need you to plot a course to these coordinates now." He fed the Hyperion's location into the system with shaking hands. Outside, the scratching and skittering grew louder, the Norklings gathering. It was only a matter of time before they led the warriors here. "Calculating route," Sarah intoned. The seconds stretched into eternity. Arthur trained his rifle on the ship's sealed hatch, tense, waiting. The ship jolted violently, throwing Arthur to the floor. Alarms blared. He scrambled to a monitor, ice flooding his veins at the sight. A Norcadian annihilator crested a nearby ridge, its massive tripod legs dwarfing the ruins. The war machine's plasma cannon swiveled, locking onto the ship, glowing as it powered up for another devastating shot. "Arthur, you must initiate emergency launch immediately," Sarah urged, her normally calm voice edged with what almost sounded like panic. Arthur half ran, half crawled to the control chair, every movement sending daggers of pain through his wounded leg. He collapsed into the seat, hands flying over the controls. The ship shuddered as the engines roared to life. The force of the launch slammed Arthur back into the chair, his vision tunneling as the ship clawed its way into the sky. The wounded metal groaned, the whole frame shaking as it broke atmosphere. Just as they cleared Earth's gravity well, a final explosion rocked the ship. Warning lights flashed red, the shriek of rending metal filling the air as the vessel spun off course. Arthur clung to consciousness, fighting the blackness encroaching on his vision. With a monumental effort, he wrenched at the controls, stabilizing their trajectory. Through the cracked viewscreen, the infinite expanse of space stretched before him, cold and uncaring. The ship limped onward, trailing debris and sparks. "Sarah," Arthur croaked. No response. The AI was offline, damaged in the blast. They were flying blind, lost in the void. Arthur's only guide was the desperate hope that the Hyperion still lived, and that he could reach them before it was too late for all of them. Arthur clung to the controls as the ship shuddered and groaned, fighting to keep it stable as he limped towards the Hyperion's last known coordinates. The once mighty colony vessel loomed before him, a lifeless hulk silhouetted against the stars, its hull pockmarked with jagged, gaping holes. Desperation rising in his throat, Arthur guided his crippled ship into the Hyperion's docking bay, the landing struts screeching in protest as they touched down. He staggered from the cockpit, snatching up his plasma rifle and a flashlight before stepping into the umbilical that connected the two ships. The moment the airlock hissed open, Arthur knew something was terribly wrong. Silence pressed in on him, broken only by the faint, echoing drip of a distant leak. The air was stale and lifeless, tinged with the acrid scent of burnt wiring. Flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, Arthur ventured deeper into the ship, his footsteps echoing eerily in the empty corridors. He passed darkened living quarters, overturned furniture, and scattered personal effects speaking to the chaos that had unfolded here. It was in the grand atrium at the heart of the ship that Arthur found them, Dozens of bodies, desiccated and contorted, sprawled across the floor like macabre sculptures. Men, women, children, all had fallen where they stood, their final moments etched into their twisted expressions. Bile rising in his throat, Arthur picked his way through the grisly tableau, searching desperately for any sign of life. But there was none to be found. The Hyperion had become a tomb, its inhabitants' last stand against an unrelenting foe. Amidst the carnage, a faint blinking light caught Arthur's eye. The ship's log console, its screen cracked but still functional. With trembling fingers, he accessed the final entry, Captain Ava Novak's face flickering to life, her features etched with grief and exhaustion. "Tynorcadians came out of nowhere," her recording rasped, static distorting her words. "Tore through our defenses like they were nothing. That bastard Spicker, he was with them, sabotaged us from within." Arthur's knuckles whitened around the rifle's grip, rage and despair warring within him as Ava's revelation continued. "We're all that's left," she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "No other ships made it. We were humanity's last hope, and we failed." The recording cut off abruptly, leaving Arthur in suffocating silence. He stood there, numb, the weight of Ava's words crushing him like a physical force. Earth, the colonies, the desperate flight to the stars, all for nothing. Mankind's final spark, snuffed out in the cold depths of space. A faint scuff behind him snapped Arthur back to the present. He whirled, rifle at the ready, flashlight beam falling across a figure huddled in the shadows. Spicker, his grey skin ashen, clutched at a wound in his side, black blood oozing between his fingers. "Wait," the alien rasped, raising a trembling hand. "Please, I had no choice." But Arthur was beyond reason, beyond mercy. With a roar of pure primal rage, he lunged at Spicker, slamming him against the wall. The two grappled in the cramped space, Arthur's fury lending him strength as he rained blows down upon the alien. Spiker fought back desperately, long fingers clawing at Arthur's face, but it was a losing battle. Arthur's hands found the alien's throat, squeezing with all his might, watching with grim satisfaction as the life drained from Spiker's black eyes. In that moment, a stray plasma bolt from Spiker's flailing weapon struck the bulkhead, the shot going wide. The ship shuddered, alarms blaring to life as the reactor containment failed. Arthur stumbled back, the rage draining from him as quickly as it had come, replaced by cold, grim purpose. He hauled Spiker's limp form over his shoulder, staggering back to his own ship as the Hyperion shook itself apart around him. Dumping the alien unceremoniously onto the deck, Arthur threw himself into the pilot's chair, hands flying over the controls. As he worked, Spiker stirred, coughing wetly. "You don't understand," he wheezed. "The Norcadian, and they lied to me. They're coming, to finish what they started. Earth, my people. They won't stop until we're all dead." Arthur paused, realization dawning cold and heavy in his gut. The Norcadians had played them all for fools, using Spicker as their pawn to wipe out the last remnants of humanity. And now, with their task nearly complete, they were coming to tie up the loose ends. In that moment, Arthur made his choice. He set a course for the heart of the oncoming Norcadian fleet, fingers steady as he overrode the ship's reactor safeguards. If this was to be humanity's end, then by God, he would make it count. As the enemy ships grew larger on the view screen, Arthur leaned back in his seat, eyes drifting shut. He thought of his fellow soldiers, the brave men and women who had stood against the tide back on Earth. Of Captain Novak and her valiant crew, fighting to the last to protect the precious cargo entrusted to them. He thought of all that had been lost, the dream of a new beginning among the stars, snuffed out by the cruel machinations of a merciless foe. But in this final act, this last defiance, perhaps some small measure of justice would be served. The proximity alarm shrieked, the Norcadian fleet filling the screen, their angular ships bristling with weapons. Arthur's finger hovered over the ignition, a strange sense of peace settling over him. "For Earth," he whispered, "for the Hyperion, for every last one of us." He pressed the button and the universe went white. The stricken ship plunged into the heart of the Norcadian formation, the overloading reactor consuming all in a searing flash of light. For a single, infinite moment, the void burned with the dying embers of mankind's legacy. And then there was only silence, the cold stars bearing mute witness to the passing of a species. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.